Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Cambridge Center for Palestine Studies interview series. We have conducted a few interviews thus far with various experts and especially three diplomats. And now, today, we shall be conducting the fourth interview with a diplomat. This time, we are delighted to be hosting Ambassador Peter Ford. His Excellency Peter Ford is a former British ambassador who served in particular in the Arab world. And he has been, in the last decade, quite a vociferous personality when it comes to foreign British policy with regards to the Arab world and in particular Syria and Palestine. As usual, we can say that our role here is only technical, in the sense that we do not express opinions nor positions. We ask questions, but this is only after an opening statement by the guest, Ambassador Peter Ford. We shall take this interview as long as it's possible to take it, and it should be extended for as long as the guest feels what about it and has got more to talk about, and then we shall be presenting it to the public. After that, we shall be using it for our research, since interviews are part and parcel of research methods before academic publications. So without further ado, Ambassador Peter Ford, we are delighted to be having you today. And just to mention, because it's quite important, that we are exactly 3 months after the events kicked off on the 7th of October. And by saying this, we at least frame the discussion in terms of timetable. So, Peter, the mic and screen are yours. Please, we are delighted to be hearing your opening remarks, and then we shall move on to Q&A, please.
Thank you very much, Makram. It's an honor to be with you today. I have 3 things that I want to say, each based on part of my CV. As you mentioned, I was ambassador to Syria, and before that, Bahrain. After my diplomatic career, I joined the UN, and I worked for UNRWA for 8 years. And in that capacity, I visited Gaza many times. I'm one of the few people pontificating in the West on the issue who's actually spent any time in Gaza and has some intimate familiarity with the people of Gaza. And the third element in my CV is a more recent one, that I am deputy leader of a small British political party, the Workers' Party of Britain, whose leader is George Galloway, that some of your viewers may have heard of. My first point is, as a former diplomat, the geopolitics of the current Gaza situation, or rather the regional politics. And what's striking is how the Americans seem desperate to avoid regional spread of the issue. Now, what do the Americans mean by stopping the regional spread? It seems that what they mean is to prevent allies of the resistance in Gaza intervening in a way helpful to the resistance. Therefore, the Americans are unhappy with Hezbollah for creating a front on the northern border of Israel, which is tying up perhaps about half of Israel's crack divisions and preventing them creating more havoc in Gaza. What the Americans mean also is preventing the Ansar Allah, known wrongly as the Houthis, the Ansar Allah of Yemen, preventing them from trying to apply sanctions to Israel. After all, what the Ansar Allah are doing in terms of impeding passage of tankers and other vessels bound for Israel is no different from what the British did to an Iranian tanker bound for Syria in 2018, when 30 British Marines forcibly took control of an Iranian tanker in enforcement of illegal sanctions not approved by the United Nations. So what's good for one ought to be good for the other. Regionalization, oh, by the way, that episode ended very badly for the British because, of course, the Iranians, with whom it's a mistake to trifle, retaliated in the same way. They sequestered one or two British vessels, and the British had to quietly surrender. Hopefully the lesson was learned, but I doubt it, knowing the British political machine. So regionalization, but in one important respect, regionalization has already been prevented by the Chinese. When the Chinese mediated between Iran and Saudi Arabia and brokered, if not a peace agreement, then brokered at least a new working arrangement, modus vivendi, between these two important regional powers, which is having the effect, I believe, of sparing Saudi Arabia being dragged into this conflict militarily. Let's not forget that it was only in, I think, 2019 that the Abqaiq refinery, very important refinery in eastern Saudi Arabia, was attacked, some say by Iran. That was never quite made clear, but the upshot eventually was that the Saudis, after an interval, realized that it was better for them to make peace with their enemies rather than rely on the Americans, who were more likely to drag Saudi Arabia into conflict. So what we're seeing today is, in fact, the fruits of diplomacy, the Saudis' own independent diplomacy, helped along by the Chinese and by the responsive Iranians. That's why we're not seeing attacks on Abqaiq and the Gulf countries being dragged into this conflict. So that was the first point I wanted to make about regionalization. The Americans harping on this is a reflection of their impotence. They have, or they think they have, control over the local situation in Gaza, where, of course, Israel, fueled by American arms supplies, is vastly superior, but they don't have quite the same dominance in the region as a whole. And this is why they want others to do their work for them. And I'm quite sure this is what Blinken has been doing this very day in Saudi Arabia, pleading with the Saudis to talk to their new friends in Tehran and plead with them to call off the Ansar Allah of Yemen. And I very much doubt that he will succeed. The second part of my CV was my UN experience as a fundraiser for UNRWA. I raised literally hundreds of, or was instrumental in raising hundreds of millions of dollars for Gaza reconstruction from Gulf countries after previous rounds of Israeli war on Gaza. Particularly, I think it was the 2009 round, but then again in 2014. And each time the Gulf countries did come forward to make very important contributions, particularly to rebuilding houses and schools. Entire new quarters of Gaza were created with Saudi and Emirati money. Separately, the Qataris were generous, but they dealt more directly with Hamas. And the Saudis and others preferred to arrange their donations through UNRWA because they did not want to deal with Hamas. And this, I think, is the formula for the future, that the UN agencies must take a lead in the reconstruction of Gaza, offering a conduit independent of Hamas and its allies, which I fully expect to be still there the day after, as the Americans and the Israelis are calling peace. The UN is fully capable, has all the machinery necessary through UNRWA and several other UN agencies, fully capable of bringing about meaningful reconstruction of Gaza. But there will need to be a separate track directly to Hamas. Effectively, I fully expect Hamas to be left standing. However many fighters are killed, I fully expect the political structure to remain in place, just as we hear on a daily basis from the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health in Gaza. In the same way, all the other structures are still there. They're impeded, obviously, in their daily operations, but the structures are still there, and they will still be there in a month's time or 6 months' time. All this talk about alternative structures, forms of government, the formulae for the day after, are fantasies. Fantasies. We have been here before. All that's different is the scale of the destruction that the Israelis have brought about. We've had Israeli occupations before. One of the options involves being fantasized about involves the Israelis remaining not just in security control, but some form of political control, whereby they would work alongside Gaza notables. For anyone who actually knows Gaza, this is cloud cuckoo land. This is fantasizing. This is wishful thinking. This is nonsense. And even talking about it only delays the inevitable. The Israelis have been pushed out of Gaza before. They didn't leave Gaza the first time because they were kind. They were pushed out. And in the end, they will be pushed out again, just as they were pushed out of Lebanon twice. Anything else is just delaying the inevitable and prolonging the agony of Gazans. And my third and final point relating to the more recent part of my CV is about British politics. I'm deputy leader of a party which is fully supportive of the Palestinians and which deplores the inability, unwillingness of the main British political parties to condemn Israeli behavior, to make statements of the obvious, that atrocities are being carried out by Israel by name, to stop talking in generalities, and to demand an immediate ceasefire, a withdrawal of Israeli forces, and a return to legality, which would require recognition of the government of Gaza, or at the very least, some expressions of support for actual democracy in Gaza. But I'm afraid the British political parties are in lockstep. It's notable that the Labour Party, which might normally have been expected to be the peace party, is in lockstep with the Tories, and this is for selfish political reasons. They after the Corbyn experience, they are terrified of being thought to be anti-Semitic, and therefore they will not use the word Israel and condemn in the same sentence. And indeed, they will always be one step behind the Tories. The Tories can do whatever they want on Gaza, and Mr. Starmer will be one step behind, never ahead. So we look forward, those in my party, to the general elections, when the voters will be given a chance in the constituencies where we shall be fielding candidates, a chance to vote for decency and to punish Labour and the Conservatives.
Thank you for this opening statement, Peter. May I kindly start with a question which might, with your help, disentangle a very important aspect of foreign policy in Europe. The UK was an EU member. It isn't at the moment. And the main question is how much the UK policy differ from the EU policy, or is it still connected or not?
Well, the sad thing is that it's identical to EU policy, even though that is no longer necessary. Essentially, Britain and Germany are in the same pro-Israeli position, and Germany dictates EU policy. It's not that the EU is exerting any influence over Britain. There's simply a convergence. It suits both the rulers of London and the rulers in Berlin and Brussels to take the same pro-Israeli position. It gives the British some comfort that they're not totally alone, that they're not only standing with the Americans, because they are isolated in the world. If you look at the wider picture outside the white man's world, we would, without the EU, we would be isolated alongside our fellow imperialists, the Americans.
Right. But when it comes to the special Anglo-American relations, are they somehow influential, and does the UK take into consideration the American position first, and then it goes to the EU? How can you please disentangle this? I mean, we see many times that the UK is closer to the American foreign policy than to the EU, especially now, especially, say, for example, on Syria. We know that even though the UK left the EU, it immediately adopted the sanctions on Syria. Now, in the case of Palestine, we see that it first follows the US, and then later on it tries sort of to balance between the EU and the US. Is this impression correct?
Well, I wish I could say that Britain was following America, and that used to be the case. But in recent years, and particularly after Brexit, perhaps, that can't be presented as an excuse. If anything, the British are even more blind on Middle East issues than the Americans. It was Boris Johnson, in fact, who went hot foot to Washington to persuade Donald Trump not to withdraw from Syria. It's no longer the case that the British are the poodles of America. They don't need to be. They are the bulldogs, willing bulldogs, and the old-fashioned imperialist, colonial, Churchillian model of bulldog. Those are the people who are in control of British policy now, people whose worldview was formed in the days when Britain had an empire, and there are no breaks in the British party political system, because the Labour Party ceased some years ago to be a peace party and act as some kind of restraint. Now the right can be unrestrained. They can be as anti-Russian, anti-Chinese, pro-Israeli as they like, and they're not going to get any argument from the Labour Party. It's a very dangerous situation where there are no guardrails anymore in the British party political system. We have a uni-party where they all think the same, and where Labour are terrified of coming across as unpatriotic, pro-Russian, or pro-Arab. So the Conservatives can indulge to the full their anachronistic, far right-wing inclinations in terms of foreign policy. And they don't pay a price for it. Certainly no electoral price, because when election time comes, the voter will ask themselves in vain, how can I protest against the Uni-Party, except, as I mentioned, in those constituencies where the Workers' Party will be fielding a candidate. But broadly, there is no choice. This is how the Conservatives can indulge their innate, inborn, inbred, vicious little Englander nationalism.
So am I right in thinking that you are saying that Britain dictates for Britain its foreign policy, and it's not the poodle that we thought it was?
It very definitely was a poodle in the days of Blair, for example, who would never allow a hair's breadth of difference to emerge between himself and the Americans. And this is still the case, I'm very sorry to say, we still pride ourselves on being America's #1 allies. How shaming is that? But British foreign policy these days is governed by whim and atavistic instinct, right-wing prejudice, and anti-Muslim feeling, it has to be said. Sheer Islamophobia. Maybe your viewers can bring themselves to do it. I urge them to sample the channel GB News, and they will get the full unadulterated version of Tory right-wing foreign policy advocation. It is neo-racist. Islamophobia of it is rampant. But at least they're now being more honest.
But Peter, the question is, you have got the politicians who may be the way you are describing them, right-wing, Islamophobic, etc. But on the other hand, the pressing question is, where does the FCO stand? Where are the experts on the subject, or all subjects, but on this occasion, the Arab world or the Middle East? I mean, there are definitely very serious and world-class leading diplomats, experts at the FCO. Do they not have any say?
Are there? I haven't met one. I couldn't identify one. I can identify several who've been proven wrong. At least two of my successors as ambassador to Damascus predicted the imminent fall of Assad. And look how correct that turned out to be. No, Makram, I'm sorry, but these old illusions, which used to have some foundation, it's true, when we had a core of Arabists. I'm one of the last of that generation, people who spent years studying the Arab world, and importantly, were encouraged to feel some empathy. Nobody is encouraged in the FCDO these days to feel any empathy for the Islamic world. The apparatchik, career people who have empathy only for their own careers. You do not make a good career in the FCDO of today by disagreeing with policy. Some years ago, dissent was, I won't say encouraged, but certainly tolerated, and wild cards were given some margin and listened to, but that stopped being the case some years ago. Now, I know people in the Middle East cherish this illusion about British clever diplomacy. It is a myth. It is a total myth. We have been living off this myth, encouraged by the James Bond culture, for too many years. We need to get over it. We're no better than anybody else in terms of diplomatic skill, and arguably much worse in terms of results.
So what we saw, say, 20 years ago, when truly retired, but when a good number of British diplomats, Arabists, filed a letter to Blair asking him to block the participation of Britain with America's war on Iraq. Are these days over, or are there more Arabists that they cannot speak, or do they submit documents and policy positions which are objected by politicians?
Well, I think the Iraq war was a watershed in many respects, and that was one of them. That was the last hurrah of the old camel corps, as Arabists used to be called, people who actually knew something about Iraq and the Middle East, and who weren't afraid to put their heads above the parapet. But there's been a passing of generations. We'd hear no murmurs of dissent from the FCDO about the genocide going on in Gaza. I haven't heard a whisper of dissent. It's rather shocking, but to me, not surprising.
So, in a sense, just to take it from the period of Iraq 20 years ago, if we just mention that only a couple of days ago, we saw EU representatives saying that they object the recognition of America of Israel's occupation of the Golan Heights. And I was certainly surprised when I watched that even the British representative was there. The British, the French, the Belgian, the German, and others were there, and they said, we consider the Golan Heights as occupied territories, and occupying territories by force will never be legal, and which came actually exactly opposite the American declaration, which in fact is exactly the policy decision which Trump took and initiated and adopted. So all of a sudden, we see not only that the EU is objecting to this move, we see that the UK is joining in and objecting. Does it not tell you something about foreign policy, which in fact is somehow elastic here?
I don't think we can take any comfort from that. It costs the EU and Britain nothing to take this legal position. It's not as though the Americans get angry about it. The Biden administration was a bit embarrassed to inherit this tar baby left by Trump, and they were just afraid to undo it. They don't even really believe in it themselves, and they know it creates a very awkward precedent. For example, in the Ukraine-Russia context, the conquest, accepting conquest, and recognizing sovereignty over conquered land. No, there is no merit in it's the very least that you could expect the British to maintain a position which costs them nothing, at all. Show me a sacrifice, show me some courage, show me something brave, and I'll change my opinion. But no, this was an easy one for the British.
Right. So is it in fact just for media consumption, or will they take it further? I mean, might they, for example, call for imposing sanctions on the Israeli occupation?
In our dreams, Makram, no, we're light years away from that. There's never been a whiff of the British calling for actual consequences against Israel for its illegal occupation of the Golan or the West Bank, we might add. Never a hint. Words don't cost very much. Actions might do. And we're not going to see any actions on the part of the British, certainly not actions that would give comfort to the hated government of Syria.
So why can they, and I'm talking about here either the EU or the UK in particular, why are they rushing, or they have rushed to impose sanctions on Syria and on Russia, and they have not been able to impose sanctions on the Israeli occupier?
I think we know it because of double standards and hypocrisy, very simply, and because they can get away with it and not be called to account, either by British domestic opinion, because there is no division among the main political parties, and not called to account by the Arab world, which, as we know, is weak and leaderless and divided. And when even the Palestinians themselves, with the Palestine Authority totally lacking legitimacy and weak. So it's easy for the British to practice these double standards. They do it because they want to do sanctions on Syria and Iran but they simply do not want. They have no stomach for sanctions on the Israelis.
May I just, in the world in general and in the Arab world in particular and Palestine specifically, they all repeat the two phrases, double standards and hypocrisy. And one can certainly, whether as a metaphor or not, adopt these two definitions or descriptions. However, yourself as an expert as well as a very experienced diplomat, could you tell us a little bit more what stands behind this hypocrisy and why do they need the price to pay the price for being hypocritical or to adopt the double standards? I mean, why have they got to appear like this? What's behind this decision? I mean, is it financial? Are we talking about lobby? Are we talking about economic interest? What makes the Brits or the British foreign policy really be in favor of the occupier in Palestine and not in favor of Russia in the Ukraine war?
To simplify, in a word, racism. The Israelis are considered effectively by the British establishment as honorary whites. You will notice how the Israeli spokespeople coming forward over the Gaza genocide, they always choose people who are white. And this is the stereotype that the British establishment have of Israel. And indeed, it is a colonial outpost. This is the correct way to conceptualize the situation, that the Israelis are equivalent to the French settlers in Algeria back in the day, the colons. And those two groups, by the way, Israelis and the Pieds Noirs, the French colonialists, were always very close. And the French relished in those days the opportunity to see the Arabs being beaten. And the Israelis are not mistaken in their propaganda. You notice how they never speak about Palestinians. It's always Arabs. They appeal to racist stereotypes. This is ironic when they themselves are the first to charge others with racism, but they are the biggest racists of all. And this is their appeal to the British establishment. They are seen as honorary whites. They are considered the only democracy in the Middle East, when transparently they are the biggest oppressive power. But they speak the same language. They speak English. They look like us. You cannot go deeper than that. It's very activistic. They appeal to the right wing, to the colonial mentality of the British, which is still there. We've never gotten over the empire. Our diplomacy is just empire by another means. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, but Peter, if we look at history, we can clearly tell that the Europeans, white Europeans, were not in favor of the Jews or the presence of the Jews in Europe, or in favor of treating them well. I mean, it did not happen only in Europe, it happened also in Britain. We know that they were banned from being in many parts of Britain, and they were not practically treated favorably. My question is, if if we recall slightly the work of Israel lobby or the Zionist lobby, call it the way you wish, don't you think that the support that the Israeli occupation is getting from Britain in particular is based on economic relations and the work of the lobby in Britain rather than just only racism?
Yes, there are interests involved. There are careers that depend on not upsetting the Israeli lobby in Britain. Yes, but it works with fertile soil. The soil is the ingrained racism, but then they work it. They work it with money through institutions, infiltrating into different institutions, think tanks, media, diplomacy, and exerting influence in that way. But what is not at stake here are British economic interests. Our trade investment in Israel is piffling compared with our interest in the Arab world. So it's not that kind of interest. It's more venal. It applies more at the level of individuals, corrupt and corrupted individuals, and political cowardice. There's nothing on the other side. It's decades since the Arabs in London tried to exercise some countervailing pressure when Arab oil money counted for something, when the Arabs instituted an oil embargo back in 1973. But those days are long gone. Now the Israeli lobby has a free run.
But why do you think this time the Arab embargo or oil embargo has not been implemented?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think one reason is simply the economics of it, that the 73 oil embargo did backfire ultimately on Arab OPEC because it stimulated the West, and particularly America, to find other sources of oil. And we're now seeing the results of that America is largely self-sufficient in oil. So the Arabs understandably don't want to repeat that. There are also conjunctural issues at the moment with the oil price being rather weak because the world economy is weak coming out of the COVID years and buffeted by pressures from the Ukraine war. But there is also, my personal opinion, a different generation of leaders. There's no King Faisal, in a word. There is no King Faisal today.
So they could have rich Arab regime states. They could have helped Palestinians more, but because the new generation has got a different agenda then, or a different understanding, they refrain from doing that?
It's worse than that. With the process of normalization between a number of Arab Gulf countries and others, Morocco, Sudan, the process of normalization encouraged the Israelis. That's why we're there today in Gaza. It emboldened the Israelis. I believe the Gulf countries have a heavy moral responsibility to pick up the tab for the reconstruction of Gaza. They effectively encouraged the Israelis to think that the Palestine issue could be ignored, that the Israelis could be as cruel as they wanted to be with Gaza, and the Arabs would do nothing, not only do nothing, but would leap into bed with them. This is shameful. They should be ashamed. I'm very glad that Saudi Arabia didn't jump into bed. They must be grateful for small mercies. But the talks that were underway, the normalizations which had already taken place, emboldened the Israelis and are a major cause of the Gaza war.
So today, I'm sure that all the world watches live the combination of genocide and ethnic cleansing, what I coined as the cleansocide. And still, if we talk about the Arab rulers or regimes, or in particular those powerful ones, they must have been able to do something more. What else do you think they can or could do or could have done, and they haven't done apart from the oil embargo?
Well, one simple action they could quickly take at low cost would be to join South Africa in indicting Israel before the International Court of Justice. I find it rather shocking that only non-Arab Islamic nations have so far come forward to associate themselves with South Africa's case. Maybe given a little more time, other Arab countries will come forward, but they're not rushing. Their most important role, however, will be financial. Gaza will be heavily reliant on Gulf money to recover. This is the price that the Gulf countries must pay.
But could they have, for example, at least those who have normalized with the Israeli occupation, could they have, say, decided to cut ties or withdraw ambassadors, or do they see that as counterproductive?
Yes, I find it shocking that they did not cut relations, frankly. The cost to them would have been having a row with America, but I don't think America would have taken any concrete steps against them in the circumstances. It is shaming. I won't say surprising, because for a number of years, we've been gradually accustomed to Gulf defeatism and willingness to sell out the Palestinians. They should have cut relations. Even today, they should be doing it.
So, in a sense, to link it to your first point about regionalization, do you think, or perhaps you do not, that the agreement between Iran and Saudi, which was mediated by China, has it not impacted slightly on regional policy, in the sense that perhaps Saudi Arabia would be slightly more closer to those who are somehow not directly in relations or in diplomatic relations with the Israeli occupation, but rather exercising or exerting a little bit caution? I mean, had there not been now this agreement between Iran and Saudi, would we have seen a different scene, or would it have been the same? Or does it not have any impact on the Palestinian cause?
Yes, without that agreement, we would be seeing in the Strait of Hormuz what we are seeing in the Bab el-Mandeb. the Gulf would be seeing disruptive action against shipping, perhaps rather than or in addition to the Red Sea. That is not happening because of this far-sighted initiative of the rulers of Saudi Arabia and Iran, helped by China, which has proven that the security lies in not having enemies. And I think Saudi woke up belatedly to this fact after the bad experience of 2019 when it was attacked. And they said to themselves, well, not only is America not protecting us, preventing attack by Iran, but we're also paying the price. It's like New York mafia. You pay protection money, you expect protection. They weren't even getting protection. And so they drew the conclusion that they better make peace with the people who were beating up on them. And this has worked like a charm. This far-sighted diplomacy by the Saudis is reaping major dividends in this crisis. It is sparing Saudi Arabia from being dragged into it. And in the days to come, I think the value of this new relationship between Iran and Saudi Arabia will prove helpful. We may see them collaborating on the reconstruction of Gaza. We may see them teaching the United States a lesson. Maybe that's wishful thinking. But the Americans have elections coming up, and they're likely to have soon a president who is much more focused on China and who just wants the Middle East to be quiet.
So would you say that had there not been at the moment this agreement between Iran and Saudi, we would have seen a regional war, which now it seems America doesn't want it to erupt or spread out. I mean, is there any benefit, regional benefit, from having this kind of agreements between Iran and Saudi?
Yes, I think all the countries of the Gulf are benefiting. If the UAE, which wasn't a party to this arrangement and wasn't very happy about it, but nevertheless, they are also receiving benefits. Their shipping is not being intercepted. I think this is entirely down to this new arrangement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. We would not have seen open war, but we would have seen repeats of Abqaiq, things of that nature, or maybe just attacks on tankers. This is the most likely, with economic consequences far greater than those which apply to the Red Sea. And so the world is being spared that. And not only is it no thanks to the Americans were horrified when their allies slipped off the reservation to make peace with Iran. They were horrified. So it's no thanks to America, but we are increasingly seeing a multipolar world now, and Saudi Arabia is a leading member and showing the way.
So, in a sense, can we practically talk, because you have just mentioned the multi-polar world we are living in, could China and Russia have been more helpful now on Palestine than they are? I mean, in many articles we read, there is this opinion that they could have done more to help Palestine, because traditionally they have been supporting of the Palestinian rights. And we have seen them say, for example, perhaps it's not the same case. I mean, we have seen China and Russia vetoing all along the aggression against Syria at the UN Security Council. So there is this feeling amongst many segments that they could have done more, and they are procrastinating. What's your take on that, please?
No, this is unfair on both Russia and China. The two cases are a bit different, but you cannot expect either of them to be more pro-Palestinian than Arab countries, than Palestine's neighbors and Arab brothers. You cannot morally expect anybody to be more Arab than the Arabs. In Syria, the Russians, of course, had a direct interest and already had a major military presence in Syria. Defeat for Assad would have been a defeat for Russia. I'm afraid defeat for Gaza is not going to be a defeat for anybody else. So they did not have the same justifications or incentives or capability. And the Chinese, well, China is increasingly coming into the line of fire from the United States. Their priority must be to protect themselves, to not get involved in struggles unnecessarily, and to reserve their ammunition for the battles to come nearer to China itself.
But having said that, we know now that from the Syrian case, it has never been an ethnic support or a pan-Arab support. We see that quite a good number of Arab regimes operated and funded terror in Syria to topple the Syrian state. So it has never been pan-Arab, nationalistic, national, nor ethnic. On the other hand, now with South Africa submitting the lawsuit at the International Court of Justice, we also see that alliances in international relations have very little to do with ethnicity or nationalism. It's got to do with principles and or interests. So it's a very interesting point what you mentioned, that in fact had Syria lost, Russia would have as well suffered quite a bit of a loss. But in the Palestinian case, the only losers or might lose are the Palestinians. Is it because the Palestinian leadership picked the wrong ally, i.e. America?
The problem is rather that Hamas was allied to Iran. Just now I said the only loser from Gaza's fall would be Hamas, but no, it would also be a defeat for Iran. Not quite as big a defeat as the loss of Syria would be to the Russians, but it would be a strategic loss for Iran. And of course, this is a major reason why Arab countries that were on bad terms with Iran in the past had these reservations about the resistance. They did not want to be helping Iran's allies. And there is still a residue from that. But who knows, with time, when the dust settles, we may see more fruits from the new understanding between Saudi and Iran that may benefit reconstruction in Gaza.
If I may, please, Peter, back to the, say, positions of NATO members. We know that officially the NATO isn't involved in this cleansocide or this war against the Palestinian people, which is twofold: ethnic cleansing and genocide. But we have seen, for example, some EU members, such as Spain, for example, expressing opposition to the, not only to the American position, to the Israeli occupation, as well as to other European members, and certainly against the US. Does it have any weight? And if it's got any power, where does this power lie?
No power whatsoever. I would have to say, none of the European dissenters carry any weight. I mean, good on them for doing the right thing. One wishes others would do the same, but it's really neither here nor there. And they're not taking, let's not exaggerate, they're not taking a big risk for themselves. They're not making sacrifices. They're just words. They're just words, and they're responding to their own internal domestic opinion. Governments don't do the right thing because it's the right thing. They do it because they have to. And sometimes street democracy works even better than the ballot box. And the sight of hundreds of thousands of Europeans on the streets is heeded by some governments, but not others like our own here in Britain.
So do you think that the British government has been somehow receptive to the local national British public opinion? Because most of it has been opposing to this cleansocide. So do you think that sacking the secretary, the Home Office Secretary, Suella Braverman, and having this shift in the Foreign Office, asking cleverly to step aside and bringing back a former Prime Minister, David Cameron, to lead the FCO, is this something that expresses or shows that the British government has somehow shown a little bit of care for the British public, if only because of electoral interests?
No, I don't think so. I wish that were the case, but I think there are other explanations. Braverman was sacked because he invited the sack. She was clearly positioning herself for a run at the leadership after the Tories get kicked out of the next election. She was invited. She would have been disappointed not to get the sack. She left Sunak with no choice. He wasn't swayed, I'm sure, by the consideration that somehow it would satisfy part of public opinion to get rid of her. He did it because he had to. And Cameron, I don't see any improvement whatsoever. He's quickly adopted the same language as cleverly. I don't see a hair's breadth of difference between them. He just sounds more posh. But on the substance, he's no different and just as cynical as the others. No, the public opinion, the British government is ignoring public opinion. The opinion polls, as well as boots in the street, show that the vast majority of British public opinion is solidly with the Palestinians and critical of Israel. But because Labour adopts the same position as the government are paying no price. It's a matter of indifference to them, what the people think, because the people don't have a choice, except, as I mentioned before, hopefully there will be a third party in the coming general election. But at the moment, the perception on the part of both the government and the Labour Party is that there are no votes in doing the right thing.
So practically, even if the Labour Party wins the forthcoming elections, you don't see or predict any change in its policy towards Palestine. Will it remain the same as the Tories one?
I believe it will. It will. Was British foreign policy more even-handed in the time of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown? Not noticeably. I don't think so. And the legacy of the Corbyn period will still be there. Starmer will always be looking over his shoulder at that, and they will draw the conclusion from their success in the general election that an Atlanticist, patriotic, nationalist, imperialist foreign policy is what the people accept, if not actively want. And they will not change the main lines of policy.
So to be honest, I personally heard the former Labour leader, Ed Miliband, saying at a banquet in London that if he is to be elected, he will immediately recognize a Palestinian state. Why has there been this shift in the positions of the Labour Party?
Well, as far as I'm aware, that is not the official position of the Labour Party. Ed Miliband can say what he likes, but that is not the position of the Labour Party. And we shall see if and when. But, you know, this is cheap. Words are cheap. It's not brave. It's not taking a risk. Over 100 countries around the world have recognized Palestine as a state. It's recognized at the United Nations as a state.
Yeah, but there is a difference between the types of recognitions. Some states recognized Palestine through the parliaments, but not the government. Even the British Parliament, in fact, recognized the state of Palestine, but it did not really move. This decision was not adopted by the British government. Equally, many others, but on the other hand, others did, other governments did recognize the state of Palestine. My question is, if you could kindly explain to us, what's the difference then between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party when it comes to Palestine, if there is any?
There is none. There is a history on the part of Labour of having been a little bit more pro-Palestinian, and a tendency within the Labour Party, which came to climax with Corbyn, was always more pro-Palestinian. But that tendency has been rooted out. There's virtually nothing left now of that in the Labour Party. Being pro-Palestinian is seen as a disadvantage to progress within the Labour Party. Being a friend of Israel is the way to get on in the Labour Party of today. But what they're overlooking is the Muslim vote. And we haven't touched on this, but it's extremely important.
Yeah, we will touch on this shortly, but just to sort of slightly expand on the issue of the difference, if there is any, between the Conservatives and Labour. Some argue that, just similarly, it seems in line with what you have mentioned, that there will be no change even if the Labour wins, because of what you mentioned, the Friends of Israel committees or lobbies at these two parties, and that in fact the tactic is the tactic of donations to the candidates. To what extent, if at all, do you agree with this?
Well, I think it's a combination of corruption through money, personal ambition on the part of careerist politicians, and on cynicism that the apparatchiks of the Labour Party calculate that there aren't enough votes in being pro-Palestinian to make it interesting. Now, I'm hoping that they will be proven wrong and that they will be administered a severe lesson. But the perception on their part, and they've conducted opinion polls, is that they will not pay a price at the polls. Their position on Gaza is identical, word for word, with the Tories. It would be total foolishness to expect them to behave any differently once they were in office. They would see benefits in terms of their relationship with Washington. Immediately they get into office, they will be jetting over to Washington to reassure the Americans no change in British Middle East policy. Mark my words, that's the first thing that they will do. If anything, they will become even more pro-Israeli.
I see where you're coming from, but one practically could ask as well, since the situation in Palestine has been attracting tens of millions across the globe, some on a daily basis, and this did not leave Britain out. We have seen several millions demonstrating across the UK, many segments in the public, whether be it students, youngsters, the new generations, those who used to support Labour or others, Asians, Arabs, Muslims, all walks of life. You just look at the pictures, and you participated in these demonstrations. You see that there is a huge number of Britons who support Palestine, and that Palestine very much matters to them. Do you not think that losing several seats might be the make or break in the next elections?
I very much hope so, but that depends on a third choice being offered. At the moment, Labour think that the marchers have nowhere else to go. What are they going to do? Vote Conservative? And I've spoken to many Labour supporters of Arab origin, and they ask, well, what's our choice? What are we going to do? Who else can we vote for?
Yes, but now you've got your party, the Workers' Party, and it seems that Jeremy Corbyn is going either to, I don't know, one option is to make an alliance with your party, other option is to establish a new party. So there is an emerging third way, if you wish. Not that we are not considering the Lib Dems or the Green Party as exactly similar to the Conservatives and the Labour, although the Lib Dems joined the Conservatives in the past in 2010 and formed a government, which at that time nobody thought that it would happen. But it seems that there is an emerging new third way, which may provide the British public with an alternative, or am I misreading the scene?
Yes, there are bubbles coming up from the ground, and there have even been by-elections for councils, most notably in East London, in Newham, where an independent candidate trounced the official Labour candidate over the issue of Gaza. Over the issue of Gaza. And we're going to see a lot more of this, I believe, independents coming forward, and also small parties like my own, the Workers' Party of Britain. Corbyn will no doubt be standing in Islington, his own current seat, but I'm hopeful he will not form another party, because we'll be fighting for the same votes.
Perhaps collaborating in different areas as well, because when several perhaps parties join in together or make a coalition, this might be quite influential. In any case, do you see a different Labour Party or Keir Starmer once he is in power, if he is in power?
Starmer believes in nothing. He's the archetypal apparatchik. He will say and do whatever it takes to attain power and stay in power. Yesterday, he was one of Corbyn's strongest supporters. Now he wants to expel Corbyn from the Labour Party. This man will do and say anything. He will be in a long line of Labour politicians, very Atlanticist, indistinguishable from the Conservatives. This is the way of politics today on all the main issues, not just foreign policy, but other key issues. There is no choice.
Right. So if we are talking now about the new move, which is somehow at least unprecedented since the ICJ dealt with the wall in occupied East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Now that South Africa has submitted this lawsuit and hearing is taking place, do you think that a particular ruling, say, if only a preliminary ruling, such as the need for ceasefire, can change foreign policy?
Over the long term, I think it might. But you know, these judgments by the ICJ are very long drawn out. As you mentioned, there might be an interim judgment, which would be very helpful. And it's clear that Israel has been stung. Normally, they ignore developments at the United Nations or its related institutions. But this time, they've been quick to react, and they have said that they will defend against the charge. Yes, it will sting. It will sting, but the impact will not be immediate. They will certainly not agree to a ceasefire just because the ICJ seems to favor one. But over the long term, in the years ahead, it's to be hoped that Israel losing the moral argument will, in the end, count for something.
When it comes to those who are supporting the Palestinians, now many writers, authors, columnists are arguing that the support that Palestine is getting from South Africa is really, to a certain extent, more useful than the support or the lack of it that they received from some Arab or Islamic states. So first of all, do you believe that South Africa's move is distinct, and why did they do it? And how will it help, and will it be the tip of the iceberg in supporting Palestine?
Well, it's important on the moral level because no one understands the apartheid mentality better than the South Africans. They speak with some authority on that subject and have direct experience. So when they call Israel an apartheid state, it stings. Compared with what some of the Arab countries have done, it's a lot more important. It's braver, it's bolder, it's more imaginative. But each Arab country faces a lot of pressures, notably from America and the EU. We mustn't be too harsh in our judgment. South Africa, to some extent, enjoys more economic independence than some Arab countries do. But South Africa is another leading member of the new multipolar order, which is coming forward in different instances, the BRICS, the RICS, with India, Russia, and China, and others, growing in numbers and importance and influence. Gaza will be seen as a milestone on the development of the multipolar world.
So do you consider the help that the Palestinians are getting as varied? For example, there is this legal help from South Africa. There is the political category where Palestinians are receiving some help from some country, some political help or supportive political help from some countries, but then militarily, one could not ignore the military involvement of the so-called resistance front. And we have seen in the last few weeks or 3 months that some Iraqis and Yemenis and Syrians and Lebanese, including in particular Hezbollah, heavily involved in somehow diffusing, or if not diffusing, minimizing the extent to which the Israeli occupation could have been harsher on the Gaza front, from the very fact that they shifted tens of thousands of soldiers from the Gaza front to the northern front facing Hezbollah. Do you think that this kind of military assistance from the resistance front has got any bones? Does it have any teeth? Is it helpful at all, or is it just lip service?
Oh, it's certainly not lip service. On the Lebanese front alone, Hezbollah today lost an important regional leader and have lost scores of their militants. This is not lip service, on the contrary. I think without the actions of Hezbollah forcing the Israelis to divert half their army up north has been absolutely crucial in ensuring that the Israelis have not succeeded in Gaza. Without that, we would not be having this conversation today because the conflict would have been over weeks ago. No, this is absolutely crucial. And then the attacks by the Iraqi militias on the Americans have not brought any direct consequences for Gaza, but they have delivered a lesson to the Americans about what could happen if things got even worse. Delivered a lesson to the Americans about their presence in Syria, which is that the Americans like to think that this presence in Syria is an asset, but in fact, it's being shown that it's a liability. The troops they have there make good targets, and they're not doing anything useful. So this is good for Syria. In fact, Syria has benefited from the Gaza situation because it's put pressure on the Americans. This hasn't caused the Americans to reduce their support for the Israelis. That's true. But in the Red Sea, the actions of the Ansar Allah have put pressure on not just the Americans, but the wider world. This again has not brought direct benefit to Gaza, but I'm sure it must be seen by the resistance as a huge moral support. They are not alone. There are people who are willing to die in their cause. This counts for something. And it shows that the Israelis are surrounded. In fact, they cannot, as they assumed, the Israelis just confine fighting to Gaza. This is why we said at the beginning that the Americans are so anxious to prevent regionalization. They want to make Gaza safe for Israeli genocide. So I think the participation of the outside parts of the resistance, the axis of resistance, has been extremely important, and will be even more so in the months and years ahead. The Americans are having a lesson administered to them that their alliance with Israel does not come without cost.
I've got three more points, please. The first point is, will the Biden administration take into account its own presidential elections and the impact of supporting the Israeli occupation as an issue? Will it pressurize Netanyahu or not?
The Biden administration will participate in theater, not real pressure, but they will go through the motions of sending Blinken, who will make statements and urge the Israelis to please, if they don't mind, be nicer, be gentler, and the Israelis will ignore them. We know this theater. We've seen it before, and that will continue right through until at the end of the conflict or the American presidential elections. It's sheer illusion to hope that the Americans will ever put meaningful pressure on the Israelis. Only one thing counts, and that is the military situation. This is one thing that the experts rarely actually discuss. How well or badly are the Israelis actually doing in Gaza? How well or badly are the forces of the resistance doing? This is not analyzed in any depth anywhere that I see, certainly not in the mainstream media, but the fact of the matter is that the Israelis are doing very poorly. They have very little to show they still only control about half of the land area of North Gaza, and only control about 10% of the rest of Gaza. When you look at the military maps, they control only a small part of Gaza. And this is not because they wouldn't like to occupy the whole of the strip. It's because they cannot. They are prevented by the fighters and by fear of entering new areas. It's the military situation which counts for 99% of what is going on and what will go on, and accounts for the fact that I believe the Israelis within some weeks will cut their losses and be forced to withdraw. What we're going to see in the weeks ahead is the creation of a fig leaf behind which the Israelis can withdraw without too much loss of face. That's what we're going to see. They need to withdraw without loss of face. This is why we're seeing claims that they've killed 8,000 fighters, which is absurd. It suggests that all the men who've been killed have been Hamas fighters. But this is the Israelis creating an alibi now for themselves. And Netanyahu wants this conflict to go on as long as possible, but in the end, many factors conspire to make a shortening of the war essential. But they need an alibi, a cover story for withdrawal.
This is exactly was the second point, talking about Netanyahu's medium and long-term strategies. Do you see that he will force on everybody a regional war, or do you think he will obey or abide the Biden administration?
Israel will do what it wants to do. It won't listen to the Americans. It thinks it controls Washington, and it's not wrong. Through Congress, through its hold over Congress, it controls the executive, it controls the president. It's not wrong. It does hold the whip hand in Washington, but it is afraid of Hezbollah, very simply. A regional war inevitably would mean a war with Hezbollah, and that would mean the lockdown in Tel Aviv. It would mean the destruction of Haifa port. Whatever destruction they carried out in Lebanon would be equaled in northern Israel. They're not going to do that.
So if we actually just for a moment enter the simulation room, given the fact that you are an experienced diplomat and you worked for the UN, if we were to just dig into the scenario of expanding the war, which is something possible. This is a possible scenario that Netanyahu would want to expand the war, and especially a war with Lebanon. And clearly he, according to the lines of the resistance, he stepped the lines when he sent his army or units to assassinate Saleh al-Aruri. Do you not think that such scenario is possible, and that he doesn't really care about the region, having argued that after finishing off with Hamas, he wants to finish off with Hezbollah?
No, because he can't. It would be too costly for Israel. They would dearly love to strike Lebanon again, but they daren't. There is a deterrence work. Deterrence is what has kept the situation stable since 2006, the last war between Lebanon or Hezbollah and Israel. And the equation remains the same. There is a balance of terror, a balance of power. This is occasionally threatened, and it's not impossible that there could be a miscalculation. It's not impossible it could get out of hand. But there are rules of engagement. They're not written down, but they are all the stronger for not being written down. The Israelis know where the red lines are, and one of the red lines is the killing of Lebanese civilians. You will notice that when Mr. al-Aruri was assassinated, there were no Lebanese victims. There were other Palestinian victims, but there were no Lebanese. This is the rules in operation. And this game of tit for tat has been going on for many years now. The rules are established. But as Sayyid Nasrallah made clear last Saturday, I think, in an important speech, Israel should be under no illusions. If they attack Hezbollah, all bets are off. There will be no rules.
Practically, am I right in thinking that you think that the new rules of engagement have been enforced by the very fact that the resistance front is operating and has evolved? Otherwise, in the past, the Israeli occupation would have nearly done anything it wanted in the space, air, and land of Lebanon. Now it's calculating its moves, is it not?
Well, each move in today's situation is carefully calibrated. Attacks on military targets are met with attacks on military targets. Attacks on civilians are met with attacks on civilians. And distance-wise, also, an attack 20 miles over the border is met with an attack 20 miles over on the Israeli side. It's carefully calibrated. And these rules have evolved over 2 decades. And they even in today's circumstances, they still hold up. So the loss of a military commander today in southern Lebanon will not incline Hezbollah to do something rash. It's within the rules. They will take it on the chin, and they will kill an Israeli commander, perhaps. Some tit for tat.
Yeah, but these rules are being seen by some segments, some supporters of the resistance and Palestine, as being slightly not sufficient, insufficient, because in the past, some leaders, including Hassan Nasrallah, declared that they will be helping more. If to use other words, some supporters of Palestine and the resistance front have been expecting more from the resistance than the resistance is doing now. Surely one can argue that until now, 150 Lebanese martyrs from the Hezbollah have been killed by the Israeli occupation, and they have been hitting and striking Israeli points and targets. But do you think that there is a gap between the political discourse and polemics that we heard in the past and their actions? Or perhaps do you think that there is a difference between political communication and international relations and rules of engagement? Because there is this gap that some segments of the public are feeling that actually they should have done more for Palestine.
No, I don't buy that at all. I think the Lebanese resistance have gone the extra mile. You cannot expect any country or community to sacrifice themselves in a losing cause. If Hezbollah were foolish enough to launch an equivalent to October 7 on northern Israel, it would be a gift to Israel. They would fall into an Israeli trap. This is exactly what the Israelis would like. And with the approval of the world, they would wade into Lebanon and do to Lebanon what they're doing to Gaza. This would be just walking into an Israeli trap.
So do you think, I mean, talking about a trap, do you think that the Hamas operation on the 7th of October was a miscalculation and that they fell into the trap?
No, I'm not saying that. October 7, as we all know, was the culmination of 70 years of pain. And sooner or later, there was going to be another explosion after previous explosions and intifadas. No, that wasn't a trap at all. And I believe that the outcome of the Gaza conflict will be victory for Palestine. Palestine is back now at the top of the international agenda when it was being pushed under the carpet. And the process of normalization with Arab countries was a substitute for peace between Israel and Palestine. No, the Israelis are big losers. However many Hamas fighters they kill, the Israelis have already lost this conflict in geostrategic terms. They are big losers. So Hezbollah have played an absolutely crucial role in tying up two Israeli divisions, and not just the conscripts, but the crack divisions, because the Israelis are terrified that Hezbollah might come pouring over the border, and they wouldn't just stop 7 miles in. They would be capable of pushing on much further. This ties up the Israeli army in a very significant way.
So now that you are talking about the result of this genocidal war, may we kindly discuss the last point lengthily, if possible? Everybody who is an expert on the subject has been dealing in the last few weeks with the question or the issue of the day after. What will happen the day after, both on the local level of the Gaza Strip, but as well as the broader Palestinian cause. If we may take the first part, how do you envisage the day after, once a ceasefire has been achieved and things will start to sort of recover? What will happen there? What kind of arrangement might we see?
Well, I think the day after will look very much like the day before. It's not even clear that there's going to be a day after. Israeli thinking at the moment seems to be that they can hang on more or less indefinitely in Gaza. They're talking about keeping security control. And in other words, they seem to see the West Bank as a model for Gaza, the way the Israelis go into the West Bank by night. The Palestinians have Jenin by day, the Israelis have it by night. That is what they envisage for Gaza. But I'm sure that the resistance are saying, bring it on, bring it on. They kicked the Israelis out before. They'll be happy to have more visible Israeli targets in future. I don't like at all any of this talk about a day after. It usually by condescending Westerners with a colonial mentality who want to treat Gaza as some kind of mandate. No, there are no UN mandates now. That's 70 years out of date. They're not going to dispose of a piece of Palestinian territory again. It's not going to be put under the tutelage of Saudi Arabia or Egypt or America. And I frankly don't see how outsiders can prevent the re-emergence of the same structures that were there before the conflict started. The Hamas ministries are still in place. All the structures are still in place. And anybody who thinks they can take over will have a fight on their hands. It's not going to happen. What may happen are attempts to sanction Gaza, to continue the siege until the local administration led by Hamas withdraw and allow others unnamed to take over. I fully expect to see more talk about continuing siege. And this is where the role of Egypt will be very important. Will Egypt stand up at last and do the right thing?
So where do you see the Palestinian cause in 2 years from now then?
Well, with regard to the West Bank, no change whatsoever. The international community will once more go through the theater of talking about two states, and will make desultory attempts to persuade the Israelis to discuss two states. Maybe the Israelis will participate in this theater, maybe not. In Gaza itself, hopefully within 2 years, the Israelis will have learned that they cannot exercise security control in Gaza. But there may be a peaceful process before they come, a painful process before they come to that realization. But Hamas will be back in control, I'm afraid. The day after will be like the day before.
So there will be no Palestinian state, independent state. It doesn't matter according to which vision, but you do not envisage a Palestinian state in 2 years from now.
Not in 2 years, and not in 5 years. And anybody who predicts further ahead than 5 years is a fool. You never know. States do come and go. Who would have thought that Yugoslavia, for example, would break up? But for the foreseeable future, I'm afraid we will see more of the same. But the focus will be on recovery and reconstruction for Gaza, I think.
But do you not think that those countries who are going to help in the rehabilitation and reconstruction, namely some regional countries from the Gulf, are not going to want to have control and be influential in the post public war period?
Well, it will be like before, as I mentioned earlier, when I was raising funds in the Gulf. What we were offering as a UN agency was a facility for helping Gaza without helping Hamas, or without being involved with Hamas. And I'm sure the UN will offer the same possibility. that's how it will work. But maybe others, I'm thinking mainly of Qatar, will do what they did before and help directly.
So what kind of objectives will have Netanyahu or the Israeli occupation have achieved after having conducted this cleansocide, genocide, and ethnic cleansing with tens of thousands of Palestinians being killed?
Well, I think Netanyahu will be gone. The moment the conflict ends, he will be dead meat. He's very unpopular in Israel. He was vastly unpopular before this conflict. He's enjoyed a temporary partial recovery, but as it becomes clear that the military gains from the conflict have been negative, that will seal his fate, and he may have an appointment with justice. He's dead man walking.
Right. And do you see any, so obviously now many sectors call for new Israeli elections. Assuming he goes, do you think that the other political figures who have not been perhaps less militant than him, in the sense that they wanted as well to eradicate the Palestinian resistance, do you see them changing policies?
Well, you will know more about this than me, but it's not impossible that we shall see some moves involving the elements of Fatah, the resistance elements of Fatah, could be talking to Hamas and other parts of the resistance. Abbas is 88 years old. He's not going to be there forever. This is the most interesting perspective which might be opening up.
One last question with regards to what the Palestinians want to see, the Palestinian will. Nobody seems to be mentioning the free will of Palestinians, the necessity not only to have their own independent state, but at least, or as well, a sort of elections. I mean, how can leading states in the West talk about democracies and the necessity to have a political process and state building and democratic process, whereas the impression is that they would like to impose on the Palestinians yet another solution without the Palestinians having any say in it?
Well, the Western powers have prevented elections being held for more than a decade, fearing that they would produce the wrong result. And this situation, in fact, got worse from their point of view, because the opinion polls show that Hamas is even more popular than it was before the conflict. And so I don't see the Western powers, which bankroll the Palestine Authority, allowing elections to be held. I hope I'm wrong in that, but there'll certainly be severe Western resistance to holding any democratic elections that they can't rig, that they can't fix. So I'm not optimistic on that score.
Because the last elections was held in 2006 when Hamas won the elections democratically. And since then, the Palestinians did not have any other elections. Some said it's because the occupation did not want or did not allow elections to be held in occupied East Jerusalem. Others argued differently, but I do not see the international community, so to speak, imposing on both sides to hold elections at any time soon.
That's right. The only way forward I can see might be for some form of alliance between Hamas and Fatah. They might come up with some new joint party umbrella movement, which might then be allowed to put itself forward for elections. There's a lot to play for in that respect. This will be interesting and does offer a small hope.
You mean a form of a unity government of
Yes,
sort?
yeah.
Well, it's been quite fascinating, Peter, to have heard all your panoramic views on Palestine and foreign policies and international relations. It definitely shed light on, in particular, the British side, which has been heavily involved in the last 107 years in defining the fate of Palestine since the Balfour Declaration on the 2nd of November 1917. And it seems that colonial heritage and decisions do not shy away quickly in the case of Palestine. In any case, I am sure that we will be meeting again soon, whether in workshops or conferences or other events, and certainly via Zoom. Again, I do thank you very much for your contribution, time and dedication. And on behalf of the Cambridge Center for Palestine Studies, our audiences, friends and colleagues, we thank you again, Your Excellency, Ambassador Peter Ford, for this session, and hope to be seeing you again before too long. Many thanks and best wishes.
Thank you, Makram, for all that you do.
Thank you very much. You're welcome, Peter.